Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the Policy Subcommittee of the School Committee. We have a fairly lengthy agenda today, but not all of the items will be addressed as substantively as I would have liked for a mixture of reasons. Part of it is we don't have everyone present who I would like to have in order to fully participate. And secondly, when we get to the town meeting warrant articles portion, we unfortunately do not yet have available the descriptions of each warrant article, just the index at this time. So some of these will be addressed in greater detail at a subsequent meeting. So first off, we have review approval of the minutes of the February 14th Policy Review Subcommittee meeting. Would someone like to move the minutes?
I actually don't recall ever having seen them, which doesn't mean they weren't sent. I could well have missed them. But...
All right, I thought they were sent out, but we could wait on that to another meeting then. All right, so next up then will be a discussion of the draft restraint policy. Valerie has asked that we not take a vote on this quite yet because she had some feedback that she would like to provide on the most recent draft. The main two issues she has with the current draft. First, she would like to see a set number of hours placed on parental notification. And also she would like a more explicit mention of providing social emotional support to the student who's been restrained, as well as to students who may have witnessed what transpired with the restrained student. Beyond that, the main difference between this draft and the previous draft is that it was an attempt at a compromise between our first draft and the second draft, which was considerably shorter. This draft puts the definitions back into the policy. This draft also puts back in certain reporting requirements, both in terms of when staff need to consult their supervisor, the head of school, when they need to consult parents, guardians, caregivers, even though there's not currently a set number of hours into that component. And it also details training a little bit more. Do subcommittee members have any thoughts on this draft that they'd like to share? Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, I think it's great that we're going to defer it just to make sure Val's here for the conversation. So I think that's great. I did like that this was a little bit more of a compromise between the two policies, having read it. My question, I think really actually is probably perhaps for Dr. Guillory or a staff member. And it's not really necessarily about the policy, but just in the collection of data that's referenced in the training and the school-wide resource for administration, and then the report specifically that will come, or the report out that would come to school committee once a year. I think it's referenced by our meeting in June. I'm just wondering, or would like staff to think about how they're collecting and recording that information, because I feel like it's been hard for us to get that data. And I would just hope that we were moving to something that maybe is a little bit more electronic in format instead of paper files at different schools. It just seemed in the past, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, David, but it feels like it was hard for staff to put their hands on numbers quickly. And so I would just encourage collaboration of some sort of collection measure that we can look at that data. I don't know, that it's really not for us to decide. That's a procedure thing. And I recognize that. And it's more of like a heads up, because I feel like it's been a bump for us before and a delay, and the information's there. It's just that it's so spread out, it's hard to amass it. Does that make sense? I'm sorry.
It does. I agree with you. In the past, it has been difficult sometimes to get access to the data in a digestible, meaningful manner in order for us to have an understanding of what was taking place in the district.
And I no way mean to say or infer that the information is not there or was not recorded, or that any paperwork is not complete. It's just a matter of the ease of being able to share and collect that data. So that was really my only comment when I was reading it, David. That was the first thing that came to my mind, was like, okay, so, and it would be helpful to, you know, like for us to maybe know who those school-wide resources are at schools, or, you know, I don't know. I don't know if that's something that would be part of the presentation or report out that we might get in June. And I guess my other question is, do we have time set in our back to school week, or is it just new employees that are referenced in the training, David? I think it was in the policy, I think it says something like within the first 30 days of employment, right? The first month of their school year or their employment. So is it, I guess my question is this an annual training or a once per employment training? I guess that's the question. Is it a longer training your first time and then an update subsequent to that, just to review the current year protocols and procedures? I don't know. It's just something to think about.
So the
It does
policy is written-
say annual training.
Right. Under the policy, it's an annual training or the first month of the school year for a new employee. I would imagine that for staff that have already had the training, it'll be more of a quick review. There are also two categories of staff that receive training. So there's the training for all program staff, and then there is also the training for, I'm trying to find the precise term here, for staff authorized to serve as a school-wide resource on the proper administration of physical restraints. And that training is even more detailed and involved.
What does the phrase competency-based mean in that last paragraph there? That's been added since the previous version, that the training for the more in-depth training should be thorough and competency-based.
So I added that language back from the, oh, it looks like Dr. Gilroy has an answer.
I was going to say, typically what competency-based means is there's a measure or an amount, or in this case, a prerequisite amount of training that an individual should get over certain topical areas. So that's what it typically refers to there. So competency-based training here is, for example, if a person were, if there was a certain type of training that was being utilized, then you're making sure that a person goes through all of the modules versus just taking an exam in terms of totality. So making sure that the progression or the series that they actually go through. And they demonstrate that knowledge, whether that's some form of a quiz or whether it's a certificate of completion, but we can get more details about that aspect of it. But it's more around the detail of what the individual actually gets. That's what I'm trying to say.
All right, do subcommittee members have any other thoughts on this current draft?
Yeah, I was happy to see the sections that were restored, more specifically the definitions and the now combined section on proper administration and safety. And I agree with Val that it would be good to specify how long we get to notify parents and guardians. And I wonder if it's also useful to be explicit about whether timeouts are treated differently from other forms of restraint in that regard. If they're not, that's fine, but I'm not sure, because we do mention timeouts at one point, and then it doesn't, I don't think the policy mentions them again. I don't know whether the policy for notifying families should be the same for a timeout as it would be for, an actual physical restraint.
Yes. Jennifer?
I was just going to say, I feel like when I was reading through it earlier, I think it specifies that this is physical restraint. I think in the definitions, it talks about how timeout is not considered part of the physical restraint. So I don't think it would be part of that reporting requirements. Timeout is a strategy used often in schools, at least that's my experience. So it's not something typically can be a brief break. It can just be like a movement break for some kids or a movement from the learning space. So I wouldn't imagine that we would have that as like a the same kind of requirement for like we would for physical restraint, because it's not a form of physical restraint. And it's not a form of seclusion, if I understand correctly. And if that's not the correct way to think about it, then we should maybe we need to just clarify it. I'm going to look and see if I can find the place in the document right now.
So you're saying, Jen, that it's not, timeout is not necessarily something we would even need to notify the family about.
I'm certainly not the authority in this area, but I don't think so. Not the way we have timeout as being defined in the document.
Mhm.
Because it's not a seclusion in its own room. Do you know, it's not a student being confined to a room. It's not even seclusion in another place. So if I understand correctly, if it's not seclusion, then I don't think we would be considering it in the same way. I think it's included in the definitions to sort of separate it, but if anyone else has a different understanding, please correct me.
So on the second page, the last two paragraphs, seclusion shall mean the involuntary confinement of a student alone in a room or area from which the student is physically prevented or reasonably believes they will be prevented from leaving. Seclusion does not include a timeout as defined in 603 CMR 4602. The use of seclusion is expressly prohibited. And then the timeout section. Timeout shall mean a behavioral support strategy in which a student temporarily separates from the learning activity or the classroom, either by choice or by direction from staff for the purpose of calming. Now, in the first draft, we had a much longer definition of timeout, but that was not the definition from the CMR. That was sort of my own spinoff of the version from Cambridge. And in an effort to try to formulate a compromise between the 9-page first draft and the 3-page second draft, I decided to shorten that definition since that one was not statutorily based. I have received some public input suggesting that we should build out the timeout section a bit more, not necessarily under the restraint policy, possibly elsewhere, but that is another area of interest. And if any one of our attendees would like to comment on that, you are welcome to raise your virtual hand, and I'll ask that you be promoted. Thank you, Ms. Dantowitz. Robin, could you make Faith a panelist?
Hello, it's Faith Dantowitz. I have concerns about timeout rooms specifically. We have timeout rooms in several of our schools, and they are used. And that's where parents do need to be informed when their children are taken into a timeout room. Timeout strategies are different than timeout rooms. And I know there's a difference between timeout rooms and seclusion, but when a child is placed in a timeout room, a parent should be informed as well.
All right, thank you for that comment. Any other thoughts about timeouts and timeout rooms? Jennifer?
I'd just like if the district could maybe come back to us and sort of clarify the use of timeout rooms versus seclusion versus timeout. I'm listening to Faith's comments and just, I'm not sure I understand how we're using timeout rooms that isn't seclusion or just a timeout for students that we would need to report. I'm just curious about it, that's all.
All right, then something I would like to look at. So going to section E, reporting requirements. Given that there's been some feedback saying that timely fashion is a bit too loose, is there a recommendation for it to be 24 hours by the time the student is home that day? What do other members think? Jennifer?
I think parents should be notified within 24 hours if their kid's been restrained at school. That's my feeling about that. I think there's sort of the parents and caregivers, guardians, they need to know so they can help kids process. There needs to be context for understanding when your kid comes home what's happened. I think, going to notifying the next level of folks, maybe it could be 48 hours. I don't know. I don't know how the district feels about that, but I think the priority is to coordinate between school and home so that it's a collaboration.
Andy?
I agree that the main purpose of notifying the family is so that the parent or guardian can sort of process the whole thing with the child when they get home. But in that case, right, 24 hours would be a bit too long, because by then a whole day will have gone by. Like ideally, the parent will know about it by the time they see their kid after school, and perhaps it's unrealistic to expect that the notification always succeed within that time frame. But I don't know if it's realistic to ask that, there at least an attempt be made to notify the parent or guardian before the end of school. This is something for staff to answer, perhaps, like whether that would just be an impossible ask.
Yeah, I think I would like the special education service staff to actually respond to that, given their practical and real experiences with it.
Now, I did receive some feedback from heads of school about this, and there was some concern about whether they would be able to always guarantee that notification occurred before the student returns home. But I do think that Andy's proposed language could take care of that, where there's at least an attempt to notify, and then perhaps Jennifer's 24 hours as no later than 24 hours. So there'd be an attempt to notify by the time the student returns home, and no later than 24 hours notification needs to take place. I cannot envision too many scenarios where it'd be that difficult within 24 hours to place a call or send an email of some kind. I could be wrong about that. So I agree we should solicit feedback from our educators as well as administration. Any other thoughts? I'm thinking that the social emotional component for students who may have witnessed a restraint could perhaps be in a paragraph before section E. So the first draft had such a section previously. It was its own section. I'm not sure it needed to be a standalone. So I think that might be a place to fit it. Does anyone else have any thoughts or suggestions on this draft? Are we ready to move on to the next agenda item? All right, Jennifer?
No, I'm just gonna reiterate, I feel pretty strongly about that, a minimum like of 24 hours. I feel like if that was my child, I would want to know right away. I just feel really strongly about that. So for what it's worth.
Okay. See that Faith has her hand up again.
Hi, yes, I'm sorry. I agree with Jennifer. I think that families should be advised either within the day, or if they can't reach anybody, then within 24 hours. And I think that in writing, they should be advised within 3 days as well. I don't think that there should be any reason why that wouldn't be possible. That's all. I just wanted to say that. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so next up, we have a discussion of the sustainability policy. At the last school committee meeting, when we discussed this, Mariah had suggested that we add a section on transportation for the sustainability policy. So this current draft includes a transportation section. The other minor edit was to the resource conservation paragraph. There was a suggestion from Clint Richmond that short-term prices be rephrased as short-term financial costs. So I also incorporated that edit. Jennifer?
I'm fine with changing it to financial costs. That edit is, to me, it's sort of I'm just kind of curious, why financial costs? Was there a reason, or just, does it encompass something that we're not thinking of instead of saying prices, or is it just another language?
I think perhaps the word cost is a bit more expansive than price, and that might have been the reason behind the suggestion.
There may be something besides an initial cost. There may be other embedded costs, staff, things like that. Okay, that sounds good to me. And I'm okay with adding, obviously, transportation to the sustainability policy, but there are some of the language, it's not that I disagree with it. I just don't know that I don't know what some of it will look like, particularly incentivizing the use of public transportation, encouraging walking, cycling, and use of human-powered vehicles, pedestrian conveyances, collaborating with town and state partners. It's that section there. I just don't know I don't know what that would look like for us to incentivize. That typically has a cost associated. I don't think it's budgeted, or I'm not sure if it is. So before we would pass a policy, I would want to make sure that we understood the budgetary implications of the policy. Does that make sense? So there's been for a number of years, and I'm not current on what that is. And David, hopefully maybe you'll have some more context. There was and I'm trying to think of what it would, demand management. Is that right? No. TDM, there was some, I'm sorry, help me, I'm struggling for the right language, but there was some work being done at the town level, and there was some partnership with the school, and there was going to be work. I think the select board had talked about incentivizing more public transportation, but there's no budget for that as far as I understand at the town or school level. So when I saw that language, I just got nervous that we would be putting a mandate on ourselves that is unfunded. Does that make sense? And I'm all for doing that work, but we just need to think it through a little.
Okay. Andy?
Like in reading that section, I wondered whether we would do well to include some language on like when we decide where to locate a building or where to locate a program, that this be done with sort of walkability and cyclability in mind. And also when we assign students to schools, right? There are obviously many competing considerations, but that ought to be one of them, is maintaining walkable distances. I don't know whether this is beyond the scope of this policy, right? But in considering whether to locate something at Baldwin, for example, that might be out of range of walkability for a large number of kids who would use the program, then we would want to take another look to see whether that same program could be somewhere else, for example. So is that something that we want to articulate in the policy?
Right, there could be something, language around program placement included. So for example, when we had the summer school, when it was noted that there were a lot of South Brookline students who wanted to attend, but the Ridley School was a bit far away from them, we were able to open a second summer school at Baker.
That's a great example, yeah.
It's all right, so program placement language, I think that should be added, I agree. Jennifer, to address your question, incentivizing use of public transportation, what I was thinking about there, in our contracts with administrators, we will sometimes include a vehicle, for instance, or paying for the lease of a vehicle. So in those contracts, there could be paying for an MBTA pass or something along those lines.
And I think that was one of the goals, was being able to, through the, well, at least I don't know if it was also for town employees, that some thinking was to incentivize the use of public transportation over parking passes to encourage more green alternatives and less single travel lane, which is tricky for some of our employees who travel from places where the T-line may not run, or they may not be able to commute with others. So I just don't know how we would incentivize it. That comes with, like, are we just encouraging, or are we funding passes? Do you know what I'm saying? To encourage the use. I just don't know what we mean exactly by that, and how would we pay for that?
Well, I think in the contracts themselves, so we already do that to some extent. So perhaps instead of offering to pay the lease on a vehicle, we are offering to pay an MBTA pass. That's obviously, that would actually probably be a cost savings, because an MBTA pass is a lot cheaper than paying for a lease. So I think the money would probably come from there, might actually result in a savings. And
What
then
about,
also, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say, what about the largest contingent of our workforce?
I'm not sure if individual teacher contracts, I doubt that we're paying for leases for
No.
educators.
But I'm saying if we're incentivizing it, are we say, like, what does that look like for many people? What does that mean that, I'm just wondering how other people will interpret it and what is it that we intend to do? And I think if we're, just because there has been discussion about trying to find in years past, I mean, this is years and years now, like 4 years, thinking about, is there a way to encourage people who can take advantage of it to use the T instead of, you know, we have to request a lot of parking passes for employees, and that's tricky with the transportation board and the neighborhoods. And so encouraging people, but what does it mean to incentivize, you know, the work to employees to do that? Are we subsidizing T passes for any employee who wants to use them instead in lieu of a parking pass? I don't know. I don't know how that sits in our like A, B, and C contracts. I don't know. Just something to think about if we're going to put it in a policy.
Right. Andy, do you have thoughts on incentivizing use of public transportation?
Nothing beyond what Jen has already brought up.
Okay. Would you be more comfortable if we remove the word promote from the first sentence? The district will explore measures supporting, and then the rest of that paragraph? Because what you said about incentivizing use of public transportation, there are costs associated with just about every item on this list other than human powered vehicles.
Well, so before we, I think we just, how are we going to fund those? Or
Right.
do we-
No, but
I
to
mean,
that, to that point, should we therefore remove the word promote and just put explore? Because that's an important conversation, of course, about whether we can fund all these things. But the logic of your point, which I agree with, would extend to something like electrifying our entire vehicle fleet. I would think that's actually even more expensive.
We have looked at that and it is expensive. I'm sorry, Andy, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it just the word promote appears in many of the other sections of this draft policy too. Right. So if we're going to shy away from saying that here, we might shy away from saying it elsewhere because all those other things have costs too.
Well, to me, there's a difference between promoting it and incentivizing it. So I'm all for promoting the increased use of public transportation, and to promote means to encourage, to incentivize means to pay for. Or provide some other incentive. What would that, I guess what I'm saying is, what is that incentive? Is it, you know, whatever, a cost shared MBTA pass? Is it, I just don't know what that means. And the electric vehicle fleet is also very expensive. The market's just not really at a place, as far as we last checked, where we could really afford to buy those vehicles. I don't know. I want to do this work. I just also want to be mindful, if we're going to make a policy, that there's a cost, and do we have that in our budget? That's all.
Yes.
I don't want to say something because it sounds good. I want to be able to do it.
Well, the other way to incentivize it, some people wouldn't like this, of course, is when you have a reduction of parking spaces that incentivizes alternative modes of transportation. Because if you have nowhere to park your car, then sometimes it's not even really a choice anymore. And we've done that to some extent, not necessarily within the school departments, but in general in town, where we're trying to move away from mandatory minimums with parking, or trying to push down that number. Helen?
I'm sorry, I'm coming in like at the 11th hour here, but is this what is this for?
We're talking about the sustainability policy. We added a paragraph on transportation, and we're discussing a particular clause in the transportation paragraph that reads incentivizing use of public transportation as something that we would be looking to promote and explore.
So I don't know if you guys are aware, but the town had been talking about this way back, probably 4 or 5 years ago. They kept on talking about a TDM. There was no money for the TDM. And I think until that happens, I would be very cautious about limiting ourselves.
So that's what, that's transportation demand management. That's what I was trying to think of what the T was, whether it's traffic. And that's what Helen's talking about is the exact thing that I was talking about. The TDM is unfunded. It's an idea. It's a good idea.
It's a great idea. I mean, my son takes the T because, Fidelity's paying for it, but we don't have that ability. And the other piece that we need to remember is our teachers do not live close. And, you can't, it's very difficult to expect them to be able to get to work and not be able to park.
So sorry, David, can I speak? Is that all right?
Yeah.
So the other part of it, Helen, is there's language in there about promoting and exploring measures supporting transport sustainability, such as expanding its electric vehicle fleet, retrofitting existing vehicles with technologies that reduce emissions, reducing idling time, adjusting bus schedules and routes to improve travel efficiency, reducing unnecessary trip, etc. So there's some piece about electric vehicles, which we
Yeah.
also,
I
Helen's
think that
ton of
we're
work
doing
on.
that. The town is doing that. And I
picking
don't
up
have a problem
buses.
with that. And I think we're looking into electric buses. The idling, they're not supposed to idle, period, but they do.
And I think
So-
actually safe routes to school, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jennifer.
I was gonna say, I think Safe Routes to Schools has done some work on that, which is a community organization that we work with. I think they're even put up like no idling signs and most of the school areas. I don't know, Matt Gillis would probably know a little bit more about that, the specifics, but some of this work we're already doing. If we put it into a policy and we formalize it, I feel like we should be making a commitment to doing that. And so Helen, the reason I brought this up is I just wanted to make sure we had a budget that would allow us to actually do this. And we don't right now have a budget to buy those electric buses. They're very expensive. And we don't have, and like, what does it mean to incentivize? So that's why I want to do all of these things. I am very supportive of those things, but I also know that when we make a policy, we should be able to implement it, and we need to have a budget to do that.
I agree with you.
All right, so instead of the word incentivizing, would you feel more comfortable with the word increasing use of public transportation?
Well, I mean, I would feel really comfortable with all of the language if we had a budget to supply it.
Or if the town had a plan.
I don't know what to do with the language, David, because I want it to have substance and meaning. So I guess exploring is really promoting and exploring. I guess it's, I don't know. What do you all think? I feel like I've talked
Would
about
this policy preclude us from building a garage at the Pierce School?
I don't see why it would. It's not creating any prohibition on adding parking.
Okay.
It's just talking about sustainable modes of transportation more broadly. The sustainability policy as a whole is written more in aspirational terms. I don't read it as creating financial requirements. And as Andy pointed out, every other section says we will promote. So I'm not sure why on transportation we would move away from that. I think either we make everything explore or we make everything promote, but I think we want to be consistent. And whether it's in resource conservation or food services or energy conservation, those all have cost implications, every single one of these. But I don't see exploring something and promoting efficiency as a commitment to making a purchase with money we don't have. It's just we're making a commitment to look into it so that where we're able to, we actually follow through.
Well, I'm okay with that then. In rereading it in the light of what you're saying, this is aspirational to promote and explore. It's not a commitment that we will. It's not a we will tomorrow. Is that right?
Yes, we could add a sentence explicitly stating that, if that would make you more comfortable. I would put that maybe somewhere earlier in the policy or toward the end.
I don't know. I'm just trying to be mindful that I want us to be able, we create policies and we want to be able to do the work of the policy. That's all. So I don't want to take it out. I want to make it a reality. I'm just trying to think about what are the next steps after it becomes a policy. So I guess the way you're saying, you know, like reading it in light of listening to you and to Andy and to Helen, I think I'm okay with promote and explore. That's the main verb at the beginning. And all of the other things are descriptions of things we will promote and explore. So I'm okay with that. I'm sorry. Maybe I just took us down a rabbit hole we didn't need to go down. So I apologize.
That's fine. Now, we also have with us Ezra Kleinbaum, who spoke at a prior policy subcommittee meeting, and he is asked to be able to address us again with regards to the sustainability policy. So Robin, if you could promote Ezra.
Hello, everyone. Ezra Kleinbaum here. I'm a freshman at Brookline High School. I actually haven't seen the latest version of this policy. I haven't seen it since the last meeting. Have any changes been made to the food services section since then?
There have not been any changes other than the minimally processed qualifier was removed. So it's back to the original language as you drafted it.
Okay, awesome. And I remember at the last meeting, there was some controversy, some discussion as to whether or not to refer specifically to meat, poultry, and fish, as opposed to referring to just unsustainable foods. And I think it is important that the policy refer to meat, poultry, and fish specifically, because when it comes to food, meat, poultry, and fish are inherently the worst for the environment. The way we produce grains and vegetables and other plant-based foods varies from time to time, and so does the environmental impact of their production. But since animal-based foods like meat, poultry, and fish, the animals being raised for meat, poultry, and fish eat those crops that we're growing. And so the environmental impact of meat, poultry, and fish goes up or down with the impact of crops. But the footprint of animal products always stays above that of plant-based foods, since you need not just the water and land to grow crops, but also the water and land that the animals themselves need to drink and graze on in order to produce meat, poultry, and fish. So it requires a lot more land and water to produce meat, poultry, and fish. And as I learned in 8th grade science class at Pierce, the lower down in the food chain one eats, the less energy it takes to feed them. Eating plants is inherently more sustainable, inherently takes up less energy than eating meat, and is therefore more sustainable. Just a few quick facts about more specific details. The EPA states that animal-based food production produces approximately 130 times as much excrement as the entire human population, and that animal farming pollutes our waterways more than all other industrial sources combined. And the Smithsonian Institute states that 7 football fields worth of land are bulldozed every minute to make room for animal farming and crops to feed animals on farms. If we really want to address climate change within our schools, we need to reduce meat, poultry, and fish being served in school cafeterias. And the best way to get that done is by specifically requiring with a policy that we move away from meat, poultry, and fish in school cafeterias. Instead of beating around the bush, we really need to get to the point and say what we want done. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any thoughts from subcommittee members or from you, Helen?
Yeah, well, and I don't have a problem with having meatless Mondays and certainly we need to have vegetarian options at every meal and good vegetarian options. On the other hand, I don't think that we should be eliminating meat, poultry, and fish. You know, I hear what, our attendee was saying, and I respect it, and I think but we also need to understand, that these are children who need protein to grow, and that meat, and some of them are very picky eaters, and the only kinds of things they will eat are the meat, poultry, or fish.
All right. Any response, Andy, Jennifer, Dr. Guillory? Okay, Jennifer, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I'm okay with moving away from that, but again, I am a vegetarian, so, and for many of the reasons that he very eloquently, Ezra very eloquently stated, a lot of really important information. And if we're talking about the sustainability of the planet that we live on, at some point, we will need to make these changes, because I think that it will be.
I think if it's an evolution, that's one thing.
Well, yes, and so I don't think the policy, not to interrupt you, Helen, but I think just to clarify, I think that that's the goal, is a continuum, that this is a continuum, a process of change, and not like an elimination right now. That's my understanding of it. Maybe if anyone else feels differently, please say.
Right, the language as written, it's saying that the district will be moving away from unsustainable foods and instead move towards and promote plant-based food options. So it's not an immediate prohibition. Realistically, it would be a very long transition where meat, poultry, and fish continue to be on the menu, but we would at least be trying to move toward plant-based in the name of sustainability. And I see that we have some public comments. Robin, if you could promote Scott and Anyan. Go ahead, Scott. You there, Scott?
Can you not hear me? Hello?
Now I do. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, bad Bluetooth headset. Yeah, I was listening to the conversation. I was going to return to the transportation aspect briefly. And it occurred to me listening that part of the concern expressed by committee members about the transportation seemed to be related to equity, right? And that's not in the currently in the list in the text. And I wish I had text to suggest, but that seems to be part of that trade-off between the desire to move toward more sustainable transportation while not leaving our teachers and other folks behind by requiring more expensive alternatives. So that's my comment. It seems like maybe factoring in a mention of equity into that paragraph would help bridge that divide between what we want and what we can do.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Helen.
Yeah, the other piece is we could lose many fine teachers who will say, I'm not coming to Brookline because, there's no parking there for me. I can't, I have to drive a half hour from Lowell or from wherever, Norwood, and, I can go to Newton and I have a parking lot for myself. So I think we need to think carefully about this. I do think that there needs to be a way to encourage public transportation. I'm certainly in favor of it, but I think we have to be very careful in what we do with policy. And I'm not sure that we need, well, anyway.
So Helen, hopefully this will reassure you, but there's absolutely nothing in the sustainability policy that says that parking should be limited. There's nothing in the policy that says that there won't be an ample number of parking spaces. Parking's actually never even mentioned. It's more about promoting sustainable modes of travel and transportation infrastructure and looking at ways to be more efficient, to reduce the number of unnecessary trips, et cetera. But it doesn't actually make any explicit mention about parking or doing away with gas-powered vehicles, other than trying to explore whether we can expand our electric vehicle fleet.
Would it allay people's worries if we said, instead of incentivizing use of public transportation, just say encouraging use? Because incentivizing, as Jen points out, just as a stick as well as a carrot, right? Like we make it not worth your while or impossible to drive. Whereas just encouraging the use of public transportation, well, that could mean that we sign on to, some measure that comes along that allows us to subsidize MBTA fares. Doesn't mean we're going to take away parking spaces.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, that's all. So I'm just suggesting we replace incentivize with encourage, because then it's only carrot, no stick.
But
Okay.
what we have done with electric chargers is put them either in buildings or around the building closest to the entrance. So you have an electric vehicle, you can park right next to the school. So that is a perk, so to speak.
That's its own incentive, isn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, I'm okay with us like, promoting and exploring the idea of incentivizing it, you know, or promoting it. I'd love to see us promote. It's not something that we right now, I don't feel like we've made it something that we promote highly. I think probably we need to promote the lunch thing first. I don't know, or both. Okay, so I'm okay with I'm okay with the language as it is. I'm okay with that.
It just seems to arouse persistent fears that the policy will somehow commit us to, reducing the number of parking spaces. And
I'm fine with substituting the word encourage. If that'll make everyone more comfortable, that's fine. That's really the intent behind this. It's to encourage more sustainable methods of travel. It's not trying to scare anyone or be alarmist. All right, now, as just a technical logistical matter, the subcommittee already recommended a sustainability draft to the full committee. So the reason we were discussing this today was just to sort of do the fine tuning and wordsmithing in subcommittee rather than at full committee. So we do not need to take another vote. Andy?
There was one thing in the buildings section, I think at an earlier meeting when we discussed it. So that section talks about management, like how we manage our buildings. And I think we talked about also mentioning how we plan, construct, and renovate those buildings. And I thought it was agreed that we would insert those words, but it doesn't seem to be there now.
Okay, we can put that in. That's just an oversight. So that would be in the high performance school buildings section.
Yeah, so it's about how we build and maintain, build and renovate and design them, not just how we manage them once they're there.
Right.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that sentence? Because I didn't get it.
You want me to read that section of the policy, the proposed policy?
Yeah.
It says high performance school buildings. The district will provide a healthy and safe environment for students and staff to support an excellent education through best practices in management of high performance buildings, including protection of indoor air quality, green cleaning, and integrated pest management. So the suggestion at an earlier meeting was to include, what were the words exactly? Planning, construction, and renovation, as well as management of the buildings.
Yeah, okay. And we're doing that.
Yes.
Any other thoughts on the sustainability draft? Any other suggestions? Jennifer?
Sorry, I'm just looking at it right now and I might need to refresh my copy, but under food services looks like there's half of a sentence at the end. Do I just have it?
No, that was just my mistake and that shouldn't be there. So it ends with available at every meal.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so I guess we're ready to move on to the next agenda item, which is discussion of the draft pesticides policy. Now, as many of you likely remember, we actually just approved this at the full school committee. Susan had made a point, what if DPW gets back to us? And I said, well, if they do, then we can revise it again. And in fact, DPW did get back to us only about 2 days after we approved the policy. So the draft that's before you today has the direct edits by Aaron Galantine. They all look quite reasonable to me. I would suggest that we incorporate them. In addition to those edits, Mariah has suggested that we consider merging into this the environmentally friendly cleaning products policy that already exists in the financial section. So my questions to the committee would be, first, are you fine with the edits made by DPW? And second, would you like for us to merge the cleaning products policy into the pesticides one? Go ahead, Jennifer. You're on mute, Jennifer.
Thank you, sorry. Most of what I read in the edits seemed fine, but I am personally unfamiliar with the Children's and Families Protection Act, so I can't speak to, I don't know what that is, or how it connects with that. It's cited several times. And then the other piece would be about combining them. It seemed like it would be a pretty good match, and we have talked about reducing redundant policies. I don't know what you think about it, David, because you're much more familiar with, I read it, but it seemed like this is a better and improved policy than the old one.
Yes.
So
No, I agree. And I think it would make sense to try to merge the cleaning products policy into this one. I'm not sure why the cleaning products policy is floating around in finance anyway. That seems a little strange. And also, I do think that cleaning products broadly fit into a discussion about pesticide products that we don't want used in school settings. What I'm not sure of is whether Green Seal certified is the most up-to-date standard. This policy was last approved or voted on at least in 2009. So I'd want to solicit feedback on that point. Andy?
Yeah, I have similar concerns about this this act that's now referred to that we're not familiar with, because it's referred to in a way that such that anything that's allowed by that act is something that will be allowed in Brookline. Like we cannot, through this policy, prohibit anything that that act doesn't prohibit, right? Because the way it's added as that fourth condition, the way I read it is, if it's approved by under the conditions of that act, then we have to approve it. We can't prohibit something that act doesn't prohibit. And is that really the intent here? Or if that's the case, why not just refer to that act and be done with it? And now it may be that act is more stringent than anything that we have, but we don't know.
Any other, Jennifer?
Well, I was just going to say, is there someone who can educate us more thoroughly on what this act is and what it covers, what it encompasses? Because it is, it does substantially change the language and therefore our commitment. And I'm generally okay with the edits that they made. That in particular just makes me concerned because I can't approve a policy. I don't know what that is. And now that I'm thinking about the cleaning products, does it match the pesticides? I don't know. I'm just wondering if how would we merge that? Would it just be a pesticides? Are we really just talking about the chemicals we use in schools? I don't know. I'm just not sure how we would change the language of it. I'm all for condensing things where it makes sense. I'm just not sure.
I think you're right, Jennifer, because there are two different areas that use them. I mean, DPW does almost all of the exterior pesticides, and the school department custodial staff are the ones who do all the internal cleaning products. And I think you could put them close to each other, I guess. I'm not sure what the purpose is to put them together.
Unless it's under some larger chemical agents, because they're both, that's really what we're talking about. I mean, the chemical agent, but I mean,
I'm not sure it's that important to move them together or keep them apart.
I think one thing we could do at minimum is consider moving the cleaning products policy into the same section as the pesticide one. It's at least broadly in the same category. Having one of them in finance and the other in a separate section doesn't make much sense. Now, to answer the question about what the Children and Families Protection Act is, the preamble states, the purpose is to promote the implementation of integrated pest management techniques and to establish those standards, requirements, and procedures necessary to minimize the risk of unreasonable adverse effects on human health and the environment regarding the use of pesticides within a school, daycare center, or school-age childcare program facility. So it appears that that's the current state law that roughly covers pesticide use for Massachusetts. But if we're trying to go beyond that, which I think we are, because there is pending legislation to ban, for instance, the glyphosate and 2,4-D, then I don't think we would want to have the approved under the conditions of the Children's and Families Protection Act if that does not include those particular prohibitions. So what I'll do is I'll look over this statute in greater detail and then report back on it, and also check with the DPW further about why they wanted that language in here. The statute's 8 pages long, so it's somewhat digestible to read through, but I would just want to double check on those implications. Jennifer?
I just have one other quick question. If they inserted down where it says a pesticide, it says a pesticide is an EPA regulated substance. Are there any places where we would be using a substance that isn't EPA regulated? Are they just putting it in there to be technical, like to cite the EPA? Or I just want to make sure we're not losing, to the same point you were making about this act, I just want to make sure that there's not a class of chemicals that isn't EPA regulated that we would be using that might be considered a product we wouldn't want. Do you know what I'm trying to say here? That there's not some gray area where there's not a chemical that the EPA doesn't think it needs to regulate for whatever reason and that we might be using. I just want to make sure we're not limiting ourselves. That's all.
Okay. Can you point out where you see that? I'm not sure
It is on the pesticide policy. It's the 1, 2, 3, 4th.
Oh, I see now.
Paragraph.
Okay. A pesticide is an EPA regulated substance or mixture of substances. Yes. Right. I'm not sure why we need to qualify that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. That's under the assumption, though, that the EPA is regulating all the things that need to be regulated, and that may or may not be the case. You know, there may be things that are not regulated by the EPA because they're considered like household items, or I don't know. I don't know.
All right. Any other thoughts? Helen?
I'm sorry, I don't have the document in front of me. Was there anything substantial that DPW suggested?
Fairly minor edits, unless the allowance for using any type of pesticide that's approved under the Children's and Families Protection Act ends up being some catch-all that essentially negates the rest of our policy. Other than the potential for that, it didn't seem like there was any significant change. Any other thoughts on this draft? All right, so next up then, discussion of the draft equity policy. On that one, as you may recall, at the last policy subcommittee meeting, we had a very quick discussion on that, where we discussed putting the list of different demographic groupings in alphabetical order so as to not make it look like we considered one to be more important than the other. Beyond that, no changes have been made. I am waiting to hear back from Janae with her suggestions. I know that she is very busy with other work, so I don't think she's had an opportunity to get to this quite yet. But I do think that given that we have an office of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's important that we have a policy on it. And this is an area that many of us are concerned about. So I do think it merits further work. Do committee members have any thoughts on this draft or any suggestions? No? Okay. Jennifer?
No, I was just going to say the only comment I have is I would like to get some district feedback on the policy, but I don't have any other edits or revisions at this time.
All right. Any other thoughts? Anyone?
I think that in a month I might have more developed thoughts on this. I do feel like the heart of it right now is a little bit, there's not a whole lot of meat there. And to the extent that we can be a little bit more definite, it would be good. But you know, we obviously have to be careful about what we commit to.
All right, so next up, we have a discussion of town meeting warrant articles. Right before this meeting started, I sent out an index. So hopefully everyone has that. And going through the index, are there any warrant articles that appear that they would be relevant to these schools? So I would think certainly number warrant article 8, the annual budget appropriations article, which includes funding for the schools, that clearly pertains to us.
The easements in at 19 to 21 Brington Road and 22 Tappan Street, that's very close to
It is
the
part
high
of
school. Is
the,
that, yeah.
it is part of the building. I actually asked about that because that actually was given to those people, at least on the easement on Brington Road was way before the project. And so in order to make the neighbors whole, we need to continue that easement.
So is that something that the school committee needs to address, or is it just gonna?
Nah, I don't think we need to take the time to do
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the easement that in the parking lot over by Pierce School. I don't know if you remember that. It's a similar sort of thing. It's a legal matter. Either they have it or they don't.
And then there are the two field surface related warrant articles. Those likely pertain to the schools.
Yes,
That will be 23 and 24.
one is by Clint, the other one is by,
Mike Toffel.
right, I haven't seen that yet.
Then there's amending the town's general bylaws to ban single-use plastics. Having not seen the language, I don't know if that applies to the schools, but it might.
There was also one up earlier, David, about the living wage, the calculation for a living wage. I don't know. I would just love to see the end product of that and make sure that we're above.
Are you referring to the cost of living adjustment for retirees?
Let me go, I was above that. Number 9, amend Article 4.8 of the town's general bylaws to adjust calculation of living wage. I'd just like to see where that kind of comes out at and make sure that, I don't know if it'll apply to the schools or how, and I well assume that we are above a living wage, but will be good information for us. And I don't know if it will impact us.
Do we think that the citizen complaint process pertains to the schools, potentially? That's number 12.
We should find out if it does. I mean, anything that has school language in it, that's come up before. I don't know what happened with it.
So 12 and 13 are maybes. I'll put question marks there until we can see the exact language. There's one, I guess it's 26, and I'm not sure if it will connect with us, amend Article 3.16 of the town's general bylaws pertaining to the Park and Rec Commission. Do we have, maybe Helen knows, I'm just curious, how do we liaison with that group?
We have a person, aren't you the liaison, Jennifer?
No, I think maybe Mariah is, or Susan.
Oh, okay.
And I
But
just,
I'm not sure what the warrant article.
member.
So that one I have seen some text for. That warrant article essentially seeks to expand opportunities for recreation for BHA residents. It also seeks to generate more funds for recreational activities for BHA residents. It also seeks to reconstitute who sits on that committee, and requiring that a BHA resident be on it. There are significant changes that are being proposed to that warrant article. I don't think there was anything that was school specific in it, though.
Okay, that's cool. I was just wondering. I didn't see anything else on the list.
All right, and then we have with us today Jay Schweitzer Shalit and Scott Ananian, who are the who authored 2 warrant articles, 28 and 29, and they would like to present to us today about why they think we should take these up. So Robin, if you could promote Jay and Scott.
Hello.
Go ahead, Jay.
Yes, is there a way for me is there a way for me to turn on my video?
Robin, is there a way to, maybe if Jay's promoted a panelist?
Sure. Do that.
Thank you. Okay. Hello. So I don't have a slide to anything, but I do have a statement. So I'm Jay Schweitzer. I'm a Brookline resident and a high school sophomore. Thank you for giving me this chance to speak. As was just mentioned, I have filed 2 warrant articles along with multiple adult e-tiffners, 28 and 29. One of them allows 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in town elections, and the other one allows legal permanent residents to vote in town elections. I believe that both of these warrant articles, which allow 16 and 17-year-olds and legal permanent residents to vote in town elections, would be useful for the school committee to hear. The public school of Brookline's mission reads, our mission is to ensure that every student develops the skills and knowledge to pursue a productive and fulfilling life, to participate thoughtfully in a democracy, and to succeed in a diverse and evolving global society, those last few phrases being key. These warrant articles are in alignment with this mission. First going to speak on, I believe it's warrant article 28, although I don't, hopefully it's warrant article 28, that would allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in town elections. This warrant article would favorably interact with the social studies and civics curriculum, stuff in the high school. It allows older high school students to have a greater say in education policy in Brookline. And finally, part of the vision statement of the public schools of Brookline states that students are encouraged to question and challenge ideas and participate as active citizens. And this one article helps that and furthers that statement. For the legal permanent resident warrant article, which I believe is warrant article 29, it would allow parents who are legal permanent residents to participate in elections that impact educational policy and policy relating to their children's schools. One of the core values of the public schools of Brookline is respect for human difference which includes fostering the growth and value that comes from different perspectives, cultures, and experiences, which this one article fits with perfectly. And finally, one of the goals of the public schools of Brookline is every student prepared for change and challenge, which the subtext of is instill in every student the habits of mind and life strategies critical for success in meeting the intellectual, civic, and social demands of life in a diverse, ever-changing global environment, which this Warrant article helps to do. It allows more people to vote. It expands it makes a more diverse and global environment. Overall, for both of these Warrant articles would increase participation and engagement in our democracy. And given the mission and values of the public schools of Brookline, the school committee would give a unique perspective on these Warrant articles. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Jay. Do subcommittee members or Helen have any questions? Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question about the background to Warrant Article 28 in particular, because I recall as a town meeting member 3 years ago voting for what sounded exactly like this. So what's
that is in fact,
why is this up? Why is this up now again?
That is in fact exactly like this. Unfortunately, both 28 and 29 have to be approved by the state legislature, and it was not. This one article allows the state legislature to approve it because the previous one article has expired, essentially.
So was there a previous version of 29 that was
there was in 2010, so
okay.
A long way back. Yes,
I see. All right, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Scott, was there anything you would like to add since you also worked with Jay on these Warrant articles?
No, I think Jay's done a fine job.
I agree. Subcommittee members, do you feel that we should make a referral on Warrant Articles 28 and 29 for consideration by the full committee to have us author as a school committee position statements?
I do think 28 is something that the school committee might usefully weigh in on. I remember when I was in town meeting, I was actually swayed on this one by a speech by Bob Weintraub talking about his experiences with with students at the high school. So it's something that we might want to speak to. I'm not so sure about 29 though.
All right, go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, I mean, we can always refer 28 to the full school committee and see if the committee wishes to make make a statement about it or a position. I think students are definitely will be impacted by this long term. I'm just not sure if the committee will. I don't know. We'll see.
So we're not docketed for a vote on which warrant articles to refer to the full committee today. We did have an opportunity to get a head start on this process because Jay kindly reached out to me ahead of time, providing the links to the text of his warrant articles, as we weren't sure that we would have all the text available in time for today's meeting. And then also, I think we would benefit from being able to have Val present and an opportunity for us to read the text of all of the warrant articles. So in that vein, I'm hoping that we can schedule another policy subcommittee meeting for later this month. It would be an abbreviated one where probably we would only have 1 or 2 agenda items with referral of town meeting warrant articles as the main agenda item for that other meeting. Val has already given me 4 of her available dates. And what I would try to do is reach out to the authors of warrant articles that we identified earlier as being of potential relevance to see if they would like to participate in that subsequent policy subcommittee meeting that we'll have, so that they can present to us and explain to us why they feel it's relevant to the schools and why they would be seeking for the school committee to opine on them. Jennifer?
I'm just curious, when this came up, JD, I'm sorry, could you remind me, what was the previous year that 28 came up?
2019.
2019. I'm just wondering if we brought this to full committee and if we had a statement that accompanied the warrant article, or if we came out with a position. I'm just curious for historical context. I was just wondering, maybe we could look for that.
I'm not sure, but Andy, did you say that there was a full statement?
I don't remember what the school committee did back then. All I remember is Bob Weintraub speaking in favor.
Yes, I hope that there will be students who, I love when students advocate for stuff. So I hope that students will go to town meeting and to the best of their ability and speak up. But I wasn't asking you to do that research. Sorry, Jay. I was just saying to the committee, subcommittee, we could look back and see if we did. But thank you so much, Jay. That was very helpful. Thank you for continuing to advocate with the committee and with town meeting. But I'm glad that we're gonna, at least this is a nice head start, David. This is more of a head start than we've had. So thank you.
Thank you, Jay, for coming. Greatly appreciated. All right, so in terms of just scheduling another meeting, what would work best for you, Andy and Jennifer, between those 4 dates? 5 p.m. start time for 21st, 22nd, 23rd, or 29th?
You said 21, 22.
23 or 29?
'22, 23, or 29.
All right, Andy, between 22, 23, and 29?
I think those are all okay for me at the moment. So.
All right, those are all okay for me as well. Robin, are any of those dates not good for the school committee?
I think I don't know if people are interested in the Woman of the Year ceremony, but that's not until 7:30. That's on the 23rd. So that's the only thing I'm aware of.
David,
Yes,
I'm not on the committee, but I would like to weigh in on the artificial turf.
sure.
So if you could
So
do
those-
the 22nd or the 29th, I would prefer.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and go with the 22nd so we can make progress on this.
Yes, David, do you think it's possible to docket also like a discussion of the restraint policy at that point? Just because
Yes,
this policy has been we've gone back and forth on it for so many months, it would be nice to move it to the school committee.
I agreed. In my discussion with Val, I was saying that I would probably do this as a tack on for the
Okay.
town meeting. So yes, those will be the 2 agenda items.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll meet again on March 22nd, which is next Tuesday, a week. Yes, next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow at 5 p.m.
Will the
And
full
you can-
language be available for us, David, what is the
Yes,
deadline?
the full language actually came out late today, but it was not presented in a manner that Robin and I could extract it and present it for us. So I'm very confident it'll be ready by that meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to new business. Under new business, I'd like to mention that I had a meeting with Mariah where we discussed having a joint policy finance meeting to finally address edits to the fiscal D policy section as an entirety. In November of last year, I had made a first pass on it, trying to incorporate BFAC recommendations and input. Mariah is currently going through it now with Sam. I'm going to be meeting with Mariah again on it this Saturday, I believe, and we should have a draft ready to go for a joint finance policy meeting. That meeting has not yet been scheduled, but it's very likely to occur in April. So I wanted everyone to be aware of that. And also I expect that as a part of that meeting, we will address student fees. which is something I know that you've been bringing up, Jennifer, when we get to the new business portion of our meetings.
How does something like that work? A meeting of two subcommittees at once, because that would be if we put all those people together, that's a quorum of the school committee. So may as well just have the school committee meeting. Or
I suppose we could, but I think as a technicality, if we are referring a policy to the full committee, the subcommittee would need to meet. And given that these are policies that are finance related, we want to have input from finance.
I see. So it could be officially a policy subcommittee meeting, and it just so happens that the finance people are there.
Right, and there is some overlap. For example, I'm on both committees, and is there anyone else who's on both? I guess I'm the only one. All right.
We have done that in the past, Andy, where we've had capital and finance. If it's something that, both committees need to deliberate on and need to hear from the other committee about the issue. And, it's still a subcommittee meeting. Yes, technically you could say everybody's there, but they're two separate meetings that are joined.
Okay.
Because there have been regularly finance subcommittee meetings. We'll sometimes have 7, 8 members present. So that's fairly common.
Yeah, I'm certainly not trying to throw a wrench in it. I just don't want us to get into trouble if somebody files an
We'll
open
bring
meeting.
whatever it is you're going to bring up to the full committee anyways. So.
Well, it's a posted meeting. I mean, so it's not an open meeting law issue, right?
Right.
It's a posted open meeting, so.
All right, any other new business?
No, but just to clarify, you were saying that we will talk about the financial assistance policy as part of that larger packet in April or whenever that meeting happens, right?
We will, yes.
Beautiful, thank you.
All right, so if there's no new business, that concludes our meeting for this evening. Thank you very much, everyone who participated. And we will next meet on Tuesday, the 22nd at 5 o'clock. And again, that'll be a more abbreviated meeting with just 2 agenda items, maybe 3 if we're doing approval of the minutes, but 2 substantive agenda items, the town meeting warrant articles and the restraint policy. All right, good night, everyone.
Thank you for letting me join you.